A quorum, the Finance Committee will come to order. We're here to get the briefing from the hardworking Legislative Budget Assistant and his staff that have been working all night to make sure we were fully informed of all the work we have done in this last few weeks. So, Mr. Kane, you are recognized.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Michael Kane. I'm the Legislative Budget Assistant. And before I start, I just have to really thank Office of Legislative Services, what got us out of here at a good time last night. So we didn't have, they had a great turnaround on House Bill 1 and 2, very large documents. So I just want to thank them. Before you, you have three documents. You have a surplus statement, which is a 9-page document. And you have Amendment 1244H, which is an amendment to House Bill 1A. That's your operating budget. And then you have an Amendment 1247H, which is your amendment to House Bill 2. When I say your amendment, based on all the actions you've taken to date. Quickly, just on House Bill 1, you'll notice it's pretty small. This is in a format, it's a strikeout insert format. Pretty hard to read. The clerks do like this. They don't have to print the whole 800-page document. But just so you know, once this is approved by the committee on our website, we will put up a compare report, which is easier for the members and the public to read and to see the differences between the governor and the House Finance position. So just to get right into the surplus statement, you are balanced. This based on all the actions taken in the House Finance Committee. The combined general and education trust fund is a balanced spending plan right now. 23. You can see that House Finance ends with a balance of about $44 million in the general fund, which, based on statute, would be transferred into the rainy day fund, bringing the balance to about $203.9 million. As we sit here today, the rainy day fund balance is $159.9. So you'd bring it up over $200 million with your proposals. On FY 2024 for House Finance, you do end with a balance after transfer of about $164.7 million. Since that is the middle year of the biennium, anything carries forward into row 1 on the top of under 25. So that's your beginning balance. That's your combined beginning balance for general and education trust fund. And I'll get into the various funds as we move forward. Based on the revenues as adopted by House Ways and Means or proposed by House Ways and Means and House Resolution 17, as well as the revenue adjustments and the amendments contained in House Bill 2, you have about $3.1 billion in revenue, offset by about $3.2 billion in expenditures, resulting in a cumulative ending balance with that balance forward of about $52.2 million at the end of 25. Again, based on statute, any balance remaining in the general fund at the end of the biennium would be transferred to the rainy day fund. That $52.2 million would be transferred to the rainy day fund, resulting in a balance, estimated balance at the end of 25 of about $256 million. If we go, I'm just going to not go through all the pages of the surplus statement. Just high level, how does the general fund compare to where the governor came? You'll see two large differences between the governor. As you know, you had a discussion relative to revenue that goes into the general fund and education trust fund. The House did propose to move an additional I think it was almost $300 million in education trust fund revenue to the general fund. The reason for that was to fund, to also move the school building aid and a couple other programs, but then to allow for available funds to fund other requests in your other divisions. Division 3 had almost a $70 million increase for Medicaid rates that they needed to fund. So when you look on your line 6 of your total revenues, you can see 23 is the same. That's based on current law, but you can see the difference between the revenues between the governor and the House after you account for all the adjustments. House about almost $2.1 billion in revenue versus 1.9 for the governor in 24, about 2.1 in 25 versus the governors of 1.9 in 25. offset by expenditures of about $2 billion in House Finance in 24, resulting in an ending balance of about $86 million in 24. That carries forward onto row 1. And then if you go through the sheet again, it will bring you down to a positive balance of 94.7. It does the proposed plan does require a transfer to the Education Trust Fund of 42.5 million, resulting in an ending balance of 52.2, which again goes into the general fund. Page 3 is just your base revenue estimates. You remember that discussion on the House floor. The House Ways and Means presented their revenue estimates. This is just your base revenue estimates, and you can see where the differences are there for the general fund. Page 4, beginning on page 4, is what we call our Schedule 2. We pay a lot of attention to this. A lot of the updates we've been providing throughout the your discussions have used a lot of these adjustments. Your fund split, communication services tax decisions, interest and dividends, taxes, multi-state auditors, and then some.
Mr. Kane?
Yes.
I have a question over here.
Sure.
Representative Edwards?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking at page 3
Yep.
on line 7 for interest and dividends tax.
Yep.
And I'm going over to the right where it says FY25.
Yep.
Both the governor and the House Finance is using the same revenue projection of 89.4 million.
Yes.
And I thought I understood that one of the effects of an HB2 item related to the IND tax might influence this number.
Yes, these are the base revenue estimates based on current law. What if you were to turn to page 4? And on row 5, all the way over to the right hand side, you can see a reduction of $17.4 million. So that has been taken out of those estimates. We keep the estimates on the Schedule 1
All right.
identical to base. So-
Thank you so much.
Sure. And then your appropriation adjustments. I'll just go over a few. There are many pages of appropriation adjustments. The first one I just want to point out is 23. If you look on row 11, your statutory fiscal governor and council estimated appropriations. When the governor had released his budget in February, there were about $15.9 million of appropriations. Based on actions of fiscal and actions through statute with these open warrants, there was about $25.7 million. So that was almost a $9 million hit that the, almost a $10 million hit that the House Finance Committee needed to take. This is a number that will change throughout the process. It will change during the Senate process. It will change prior to the close of the fiscal year in June. So that's just a number that you had to account for. Legislative specials from 2022, the governor and the House have the same numbers at about 265.2. And then you have individual pieces of legislation on row 14, 15, and 16. You have Senate Bill 1, which is your Sununu Youth Services Center. You have House Bill 384, which is the legislative parking garage, which was 22.5 million, which was offset with, you'll see a Schedule 2 adjustment down below because the governor had initially proposed to fund that in his budget. And then the Adult Parole Board was about $103,000. What we did is from rows 18 down, we put it in department. We combined them by department so you can see for the various departments what was provided with appropriations. If there's a 0 next to the governor's amount, that means that the House took it out. So that in 23, if we turn to page, I believe it's page 6. In total, House Finance appropriation adjustments totaled about $529.7 million as compared to the governor's of about 505.6. One of the largest appropriation adjustments the House took was $50 million appropriation towards the unfunded accrued liability in 23, and that's why you see partial of that difference. You'll know as you went through your divisions how you reduced some appropriations in 23, and that helped to offset that impact of that. I'm going to stay on page 6 and just go through. The governor had about 133.9 million of appropriation adjustments in 24 versus the House of 135.6. Again, the divisions were going through as they were developing their budget, trying to offset any additions with corresponding reductions.
Another question.
Sure.
Representative Emmerich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. and thank you for taking the question. Is there anywhere in here that reflects the pay raises, or is it throughout?
Yes. So on page,
If we haven't got to it yet, then don't worry about it.
it's in there. It could be on page 4. It's on page 4. On row 21, you'll remember the governor appropriated in general funds, this is all general funds, $44.9 million in 24, $54.7 million in 25. The House maintained those appropriations, so you can see the corresponding numbers under the House column as well.
Thank you.
Sure. So it's about $100 million over the biennium.
Representative Edwards for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kane. So they're on Schedule 2 on page 4, line 21. Do these numbers that are reflected there end up in HB1, or do they just live here in HB2? At what point, in other words, what point do these 10% affect the salary line in HB1? Could you go through that?
Sure. So typically these will remain in House Bill 2 as the block appropriations. When the budget is passed at the end of June, administrative services and the executive branch then start to roll these figures up into House Bill 1 or the operating budget. So you'll on that date, so in July, on July 1, those figures will be rolled up to all the individual departments. What they do is they draw warrants, which is basically allocations to each department on what their share is. When you, in 26 and 27, when you look at the budget, they will be in House Bill 1. Any pay raises will be in House Bill 1. So,
Thank you.
sure.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is only general funds, but I believe there's roughly 150 million similar in other and federal funds of pay raises, and my colleague is giving me a picture. Yeah.
Yes.
So because a lot of employees are paid, you know, like in HHS, there's 50/50s and things like that. So the total amount of pay raises is more like 250 million or something in that ballpark.
Yes.
There's
for-
all those DOT employees paid out of the highway fund.
Yes. Page 72 on your amendment, you don't have to go there unless you want to, but in total, the pay raises are about 101.5 million, all funds in 24, and about 124 million in 25. So about 225 million in total funds, of which the general fund has about 100 million of that. Okay. So those are your adjustments, which all been reflected on page 1 and page 2. If you turn to page 7, this is the Education Trust Fund. So in 23, the only differences between the governor and the House Finance Committee proposal are really your House Ways and Means revenue estimates. You can see on our row 4 your estimated revenues. Governor had about $1.2 billion, whereas House Finance or House Ways and Means had about 1.17. So it was about a $30 million difference in revenues. You can see the appropriations were about the same, but that revenue did result in a change to the current year balance and your cumulative ending balance. So the governor's, based on his revenue estimates, had the Education Trust Fund ending 23 and beginning 24, since the Education Trust Fund is non-lapsing at the end of 23, at 221 million. The House Finance had $183.8 million, and that was just related to the revenue estimates. And again, that will change as we go through the process. If we go into FY24, you can see on row 1 the beginning balances, how there is a difference because of those initial revenue estimates. And then you have your estimated revenues. Another on row 4 between the House Ways and Means and the governor, another $30 or so million below the governor. Your schedule for adjustments, or where you see your adjustments to your general fund and education trust fund tax splits for the business taxes. Governor initially had $75 million, which was based on his 65-35 split. House Finance has a 77.5-22 74.5 split between the general and education trust fund. So that's a negative adjustment of $223 million. So your total revenue for House Finance, a little over $1 billion. Budget appropriations on line 9. In 24, the governor had about $1.2 billion of education trust fund expenditures. You can see the House has about $1.1 billion of education trust fund expenditures. Reason for that is because with the general fund move of that revenue also went school building aid and other programs that weren't related to adequacy, charter schools, or education freedom accounts. So in the end, the cumulative ending balance, if you count the $183.7 million coming forward from 23, you offset it against a negative current year balance of about 105, still have a positive balance, the education trust fund at about 78.4, and that's after moving all the revenue and some expenditures. That 78.4 carries forward into the beginning of 25, and then you can see the adjustments as well on row 5 on the far right, about 224.8 for the House Finance Committee compared to the governor's 74.8, resulting in total revenues of about $1.048 billion. Offset on row 9 by about $1.1 billion in expenditures. And then you can see on 10, the big change in fiscal year 25 is the governor initially had a $75 million appropriation to school building aid from the Education Trust Fund on June 30th, 25. So it wouldn't be until the end of the biennium. Based on the House Finance actions, they had removed that additional $75 million. But you can see a $20 million adjustment, and you can see that on the following, I believe it's on page 9, but just to stay on page 7 for now, that $20 million and the $10 million in 24 has to do with an adjustment that Division 2 felt prudent to make and to account for a set aside for the increased free and reduced population based on an action taken by Fiscal Committee earlier this year, where it increased your free and reduced lunch eligibility. Was not accounted for in the governor's proposal. It is just it's a set aside or accounting for that potential impact from the House Finance Committee's budget. So in the end, with the change in the revenues, the appropriations, current year balance of a negative 121, it does require a transfer from the general fund of about $42.5 million to bring the balance to zero at the end of 25. And then your page 8 and 9 are really just they're mimicking your general fund, kind of your order and your detail where you have your revenues and then you have your adjustments. So this is a balanced spending plan that House Finance right now has based on this, and I can answer any questions that anyone has.
Any questions from committee members? Push the red light if you have a question. There's a lot of back and forth on all these schedules, a lot of busy work to make them all
There
come
is.
out right.
Yes.
So, no questions?
Okay, thank you
Continue
very
on,
much.
please.
Thank you. So that's all I have for my presentation, and then I'll still be here as you have your conversations if there are any additional detail that you need from me.
Mr. Chairman, I'll ask a question.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you. Will you have a surplus statement for the highway fund and others?
Yes, thanks. Thank you for asking, Representative McGuire. So we will post a surplus statement for the Highway Fund and the Fish and Game Fund, which are one-pagers, so you'll probably enjoy reading those more. Just to give you kind of as far as a balanced highway and fish and game, Highway Fund ends with a balance of about $7.2 million. I think the governor was about 13, but you'll remember in fiscal, you just had to give $6 million towards winter maintenance. And then the Fish and Game Fund ends almost identical to where the governor was, about $4.5 million at the end of 25. And we will post those to our website after this meeting today. Thanks.
Further questions? Okay, I guess you're going to brief HB1 or HB2, or some of the other people going to do that?
That's all I have for my presentation now. So.
These other packets, those are,
Sure, sorry. So the other packets, 1244H are your House Bill 1 amendments. So that's your big operating budget document. So if adopted, those will be folded into the budget system. It's kind of a hard document to read. As far as being user friendly, we will post a compare report, which is a document that I think the legislature and the public find more useful. But this is the actual the legislation or the legislative amendment that is in.
I guess HB 2 has been shortened up considerably.
It has. We were able to staple it. So you remember when you received, yeah, when you received House Bill 2, we had to staple. It was over 200 pages, and our copier can staple up to 100, so it didn't work. You have brought this down to close to 140 pages. One of the big changes you made was in Division 1 relative to some of the OPLC changes. That removed a considerable amount of paper. So yes. So in House Bill 2, this reflects all your changes that were adopted in your individual House Bill 2 amendment packets that you've taken over the past couple of days. We did look over this with OLS and our staff to ensure that we did catch everything, and we're confident that everything is reflected here, as well as any appropriations are captured on the surplus statement on our Schedule 2 and 4.
So this is the end of all the LBA presentations?
It is, yes.
Very good. All right. So do we need another vote on accepting the surplus statement?
Surplus statement will just reflect the intent, how the committee votes, so you don't need to take a vote on that. The committee would need to vote on 1244H first, which is the amendment to House Bill 1, followed by 1247H, which is the amendment to House Bill 2.
Okay, the clerk will call a roll on House Bill 1, Amendment 1244H. Representative Heath.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you calling for a vote on the amended HB 1?
I am,
Could I make a comment first?
of course.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, there are lots of good things in this budget. Lots of good things. And it deeply bothers me not to be able to vote for this budget. I was hoping that we could reach some compromises, but one of my reasons is building aid. I wish we could find more funding for that. Yesterday, I tried to get more funding for adult education. One of my bigger concerns is the amount of money going into the EFAs. Last year, we spent $14.6 million. In this biennium budget, you have 29.8 in 24, 29.8
What was
in
that you referred
25.
to, the F8? Oh, EFA.
EFAs. I've continually asked that the oversight for these go to the Department of Ed, even if they RFP it out to the current agency. I'm deeply concerned. That's over almost $60 million going out. I'm pleased with the increase in tuition and transportation. That's wonderful. But, Mr. Chair, there are just some things in this budget that right now, if we could come to a compromise, I would feel so much better about some of these items, that at this point in time, I just can't vote on this budget as much as I want to. I mean, the raises for our state workers are critical, and it is intensely painful for me not to step forward and vote for that. So, Mr. Chair, if there's any way that we could delay the vote to do some further negotiations, I would ask for that option if it is all possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Edwards.
I don't know if this is for you, Mr. Chair, or for Mr. Kane, but if we ended up with the legislature unable to agree to a budget this year and we had to go into a continuing resolution, what happens to HB 2? Does this just get set aside and not go into effect? What happens in a continuing resolution relative to HB 2?
It depends. The continuing resolution at the end of the process is really a negotiation that comes between House and Senate leadership and the governor, and both majority and minority parties. There's no one answer on what the continuing resolution can do. It can appropriate the same level of funds received last year. It could include provisions, potentially provisions related in House Bill 2, but typically, historically, since I have been here, it has not included any provisions that are included in House Bill 2. But again, that's something that will be discussed with leadership as we go through.
Mr. Chair, I would request, if I may, I would request that we recess until 1 o'clock this afternoon.
I know there are further negotiations going on between the two parties, so I will accede to your request, and otherwise we'll have to come back tomorrow if we can't come to an agreement. So, what's that? Well, that's a suggestion too. If we
What's the suggestion?
come back tomorrow, because otherwise we all sit here waiting for some results from negotiations, and I tie up your whole day, which may go beyond 1 o'clock. So, and I don't think there will be any movement in negotiations. I think that some of the requests are intractable. Representative Papavici Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to suggest that personally, I already kind of assumed I'll be here all day today, but I definitely did not assume I'll be here tomorrow. I will be here tomorrow, of course, if needed, but if there is any way in which this can get dealt with today, I think that it would be ideal. But as I said, whatever needs to be done.
Representative Edwards.
It seems to me, given how little progress there was made yesterday in the negotiations, that today could really take a long time just to have those discussions. And in order to allow for the folks in the crowd and the rest of us to figure out what we're doing, I do think the idea to recess until tomorrow morning has a great deal of validity.
Anyone object to coming back tomorrow? Representative Griffin.
Yeah, I just like to say that I listened carefully to Representative Heath's remarks, and I suspect that all of us in this room have areas of these budget documents that we're unhappy about. But I think overall, I think it's a wonderful budget. There's compromises in there. Everybody gave a little bit. And I see no.
Representative Emmerich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm of the opinion that finance should vote, and that if negotiations resolve anything, it goes to the House as a floor amendment or an amendment in the calendar.
We have one member absent. So if he's better, maybe we have a full committee tomorrow when we come back. So I will take the advice, and we will recess until 10 o'clock tomorrow. Dan McGuire.